You may think of measles as a thing of the past. It isn't. And tonight, a viewer question brings the numbers home. Measles is a highly contagious viral infection. It spreads through the air when an infected person coughs or sneezes. Our viewer wants to know this: are measles cases really surging in the United States? CDC reports nearly 1,800 cases so far in 2026. Cases have been reported in 37 states, including Missouri. At that pace, we will have more cases this year than in 2025.
Measles cases in the United States are surging. They have been surging over the past 18 months or so. So since the beginning of 2025, we've seen an absolute major increase in measles cases across the U.S.
Cases are going up as vaccination rates go down. The CDC reports that when 95% of the community is vaccinated, most people are protected through herd immunity. But those rates have fallen below that number across the country. And both Arkansas and Missouri are at about 90% vaccination rates for kindergartners.
Typically, it's a disease of young children, and it's very effective at finding people who are unprotected.
Well, back to the viewer question, are measles cases really surging in the United States? On this one, the answer is yes. Now, we had a longer conversation with KFF about this topic. We're going to have it on our streaming channels in the coming days. We'll let you know when you can watch it.